Hi, you're on the Reddit Confessions channel, and this story starts with a door creaking open when it absolutely shouldn't have. It was 2:17 in the morning. I know because I was lying on the couch in complete darkness, staring at the blinking digits on the cable box, unable to sleep. My wife, Maribel, had told me she'd be crashing at her friend's place after some work celebration. I wasn't expecting her home until the next day, if at all. But there it was, the slow twist of the front doorknob, like someone trying not to be heard. I stayed perfectly still. The door opened just enough for a shaft of streetlight to cut across the room, and then I saw her silhouette and another one right behind her. They whispered, but I caught enough to know the voice that wasn't hers. A man's. A laugh I'd never heard in my home before. My stomach knotted so hard it felt like my ribs might crack. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just listened as they set something down in the hallway, maybe her heels, and then tiptoed toward the bedroom. Not our bedroom. The guest room. That detail alone was enough to make my head spin. She wasn't even going to pretend she was coming home to me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. No name. Just a message. Don't confront her yet. You want to see this first. I wish I could say I was brave, that I jumped up and demanded answers. Instead, I stayed frozen on that couch, feeling every single beat of my heart like it was counting down to something I wasn't ready for. And that was only the first minute of the longest night of my life. I sat there on the couch, gripping my phone so tightly that my knuckles ached. That anonymous message burned into my eyes. Don't confront her yet. You want to see this first. I didn't recognize the number, but the sender knew exactly what was happening in my home at that moment. My first thought was that it might be some cruel prank, but then I heard the faint sound of drawers opening in the guest room, followed by the man's muffled laugh again. Whoever he was comfortable enough to make himself at home. I typed back one word. Who? It felt ridiculous, like I was texting a stranger about my own marriage, but I needed to know. Within seconds, another reply came. Your neighbor in 3B. I've been watching this for weeks. You're not going to believe it. My hands trembled as I read it. Weeks? My mind tried to piece together every excuse she'd given me lately. Late meetings, sudden overnight trips to visit her cousin, and the way she'd started getting ready for work hours earlier than usual. Then another buzz. This time, it was a video file. I hesitated before tapping it open, but curiosity and a gnawing fear won. The footage was grainy but clear enough. My wife leaving our building in broad daylight, wearing the same dress she'd worn to work the day before. Only this time she was with the same man whose shadow I'd just seen behind her tonight. They weren't just walking. His arm was wrapped around her waist, and she leaned into him in that intimate, absent-minded way that couples do when they've long since stopped hiding their comfort with each other. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until I nearly coughed trying to inhale. My neighbor sent one last message. There's more, but you need to wait until they're asleep. That line made my skin crawl. The idea of sitting there quietly, knowing they were in my home, on the other side of that thin wall, was almost unbearable. I felt trapped, like a prisoner in my own living room, listening to the faint sounds of movement, whispered words, and the occasional creak of the floorboards from the guest room. Every instinct screamed at me to storm in there and end it right then. But the truth is, I was scared. Not scared of them. Exactly. Scared of what I might see, scared of confirming what I was already starting to accept. And somewhere, under all of that fear, was a small, bitter seed of hope that maybe, just maybe, there was an explanation that wouldn't break me. But when I finally saw the next video my neighbor sent an hour later, I knew there was no coming back from it. When the second video came through, my thumb hovered over the play button for a good 30 seconds. My pulse was pounding so hard in my ears that I could barely hear the faint noises coming from the guest room anymore. The idea that my neighbor, someone I barely knew beyond nodding at in the hallway, was seeing things in my marriage that I hadn't dared to confront was enough to make me feel sick. Still, I tapped play, bracing myself for something bad, but nothing could have prepared me for what I saw. The footage was taken from a slightly different angle than the first, this time from the opposite end of our apartment hallway. It must have been recorded through a cracked door, because I could see part of the frame in the corner. In the video, my wife and that man, tall, dark-haired, with a smugness practically dripping off him, were sitting at our kitchen table. My kitchen table. The very spot where I'd sat countless nights, waiting for her to come home, wondering why she was late. She was laughing, a sound I hadn't heard directed at me in months, and she reached across the table to feed him a forkful of something. I recognized the plate instantly. It was one of the meals I'd cooked earlier that week. Leftovers I'd put in the fridge, thinking she might take them for lunch. Then, as if to twist the knife, he got up, walked over to the counter, and pulled a beer from the fridge without even asking, as if he lived there. My wife stood behind him, wrapped her arms around his waist, and whispered something in his ear. He turned, kissed her, and they disappeared down the hallway together. The neighbor's camera didn't follow, but the implication was more than clear. I paused the video and just stared at the frozen frame of them holding each other in my kitchen, in my home, surrounded by everything I'd worked to provide. My chest felt heavy, and I realized I was gripping the phone so hard my fingers had gone numb. Then, almost as if on cue, my neighbor sent another text. They're asleep now. If you want to see for yourself, I can keep watch from my peephole. That single message felt like a loaded gun sitting on the table in front of me. I could ignore it, stay curled up in the safety of my ignorance. Or I could get up, walk down that hallway, and face the ugliest truth of my life head-on. I wish I could say I got up immediately, but the truth is, I sat there in silence for what felt like forever, trying to convince myself I could still fix this. That maybe I'd misunderstood everything. That maybe this was some cruel but innocent misunderstanding. But deep down, I already knew what I was going to find. And when I finally stood up and took that first step toward the guest room, the sound of my own breathing was the loudest thing in the apartment. I don't think I've ever walked slower in my life. Every step toward that guest room felt like I was dragging a chain behind me, each link made of every doubt, excuse, and denial I'd clung to for weeks. The carpet under my feet seemed louder than usual, the hallway colder. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, this steady drum that made the silence even heavier. I stopped just short of the door, my hand hovering over the knob. The room beyond it had always been a storage space, a place where we kept holiday decorations and an extra bed for guests who never came. It wasn't meant for this. It wasn't meant to be where my marriage went to die. The smell hit me first, her perfume, mixed with something else I didn't want to name. The door was cracked open just enough for me to see a slice of the room. The light from the street filtered through the blinds, laying stripes of pale gray across the bed. I pushed the door open an inch more, and my eyes adjusted to what was inside. There they were, my wife, wrapped in the arms of that man, both of them half covered by the blanket, her hair spilling across his chest. She looked peaceful in a way she hadn't looked next to me in years. It was like the life I thought we had together was nothing but a rehearsal for this moment she was sharing with someone else. I didn't storm in. I didn't shout. I just stood there, frozen, every muscle in my body caught between fight and flight. He stirred slightly, his arm tightening around her, and she murmured something in her sleep, his name. Hearing it in her voice was worse than seeing them. It made everything real in a way I couldn't undo. I backed away from the door, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard it hurt. That's when I noticed my phone still in my hand, and without thinking, I snapped a picture through the narrow opening. My hands were shaking so badly the image came out blurry, but it didn't matter. The proof wasn't for anyone else. It was for me, because I knew that in the morning, part of me would try to rewrite what I'd seen, to tell myself it wasn't that bad. As I turned back toward the living room, another message came through from my neighbor. Told you. But you haven't even heard the worst part yet. That sentence sat in my mind like a stone, and I realized the night wasn't over. It wasn't even close. I sat back on the couch, my phone heavy in my hands, and waited for whatever was coming next. I sat there in the dark, phone in hand, feeling like I'd just walked out of my own life. The neighbor's message, you haven't even heard the worst part yet, looped in my head until my chest felt tight. I typed back, then tell me. My hands were clammy, my heart still pounding from what I'd just seen in the guest room, but some masochistic part of me needed to know. I wanted to believe there couldn't possibly be anything worse than what I'd just witnessed. That's when he sent a voice note instead of a text. I put the phone to my ear, and the first thing I heard was his low whisper. Nathan, this isn't just some random guy she met. This is the man she's been seeing every time she said she was visiting her cousin. But here's the thing. He's not her coworker. He's not a stranger. He's your old roommate, Aaron. I felt my stomach drop so hard it almost made me gag. Aaron. The same Aaron who'd stood next to me at my wedding, who'd toasted to a love that lasts forever, who'd crashed on our couch during hard times, eating the food I cooked and joking about how he'd never find someone as patient as me. I hadn't spoken to him in over a year, after he suddenly moved out of state for a job opportunity. Turns out, he hadn't gone far, just far enough to keep his distance while worming his way into my wife's life. The neighbor continued, saying he'd seen Aaron in the building before, slipping in through the side entrance when most people were at work. He'd even helped them once, holding the elevator while they laughed like teenagers skipping school. My mind flashed back to little moments I'd brushed off. Maribel smiling at texts during dinner, her phone lighting up with just a first initial, her defending an old friend when I once asked about a man she'd been talking to on social media. My body went cold. It wasn't just betrayal. It was betrayal from someone who knew me better than most people ever had. Every memory I had of Aaron started to feel tainted, rewritten into something mocking. And worse than that, I realized my wife had been carrying on with him under my nose for God knows how long, using my trust as a cover for every lie she told. I didn't respond to my neighbor right away. I just sat there, staring at the hallway that led to the guest room, imagining them sleeping there without a care in the world. My marriage wasn't just broken. It had been hollow for longer than I'd known, and I was the fool who hadn't heard the echo. Then, just as I was about to shut off my phone, my neighbor sent one last message for the night. If you want the full truth, meet me tomorrow at 9. Bring nothing but your phone. You'll need proof. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I couldn't, but because I was terrified of what the morning would bring. By the time the first hints of morning light crept through the blinds, I felt like I'd aged 10 years. My eyes burned from being awake all night, my head heavy with too many thoughts crashing into each other. I kept hearing my neighbor's voice in my head, repeating that name, Aaron, over and over until it stopped sounding like a person and started feeling like a curse. At 8:30, I finally stood up from the couch, stretched the stiffness from my legs, and took a long, shaky breath. Maribel and Aaron were still asleep in the guest room, the faint sound of their breathing carrying into the hallway. I grabbed my phone, my wallet, and my keys, then stepped out into the hall without making a sound. Apartment 3B was just across the courtyard, a few doors down from the laundry room. I'd barely spoken to my neighbor before last night, just the occasional wave, but when I knocked softly, the door opened almost instantly. The man who stood there was in his late 50s, sharp-eyed, wearing a faded baseball cap. "Come in," he said quietly, glancing toward the hallway like he didn't want anyone to see me. Inside, his living room looked more like a security office than an apartment. Against one wall was a desk with multiple monitors, each showing different angles of the building. The front entrance, the side alley, the parking lot, even a grainy feed of our shared hallway. He gestured for me to sit and pulled up a folder labeled with my apartment number. My stomach twisted. He clicked on a video dated 6 weeks ago, and my world tilted. The footage showed Maribel and Aaron walking into my apartment while I was at work, carrying grocery bags, wine, and what looked like an overnight bag. They were laughing, bumping shoulders like a couple who'd been doing this for years. He skipped ahead, and the next clip was from the next morning. Aaron leaving my apartment, kissing Maribel in the doorway before she locked it behind him. She then changed clothes, grabbed her work bag, and walked out like nothing had happened. "This is just 1 week," my neighbor said, flipping through more files. "I've got months of this. Different times, different excuses, always when your car isn't in the lot." I sat there staring at the screen, my throat tight, feeling my hands start to shake again. Each video felt like a knife, but I couldn't stop watching. The casual way they moved through my space, the way they used my home as their hiding place, made me feel smaller and smaller with every passing second. Then he opened one more file, this one just from 3 nights ago. It wasn't video, it was audio. He hit play, and my wife's voice filled the room, laughing softly. "He'll never do anything about it. Nathan's too scared to even look me in the eye when he suspects something. I could walk right out the door with Aaron, and he'd just sit there." I froze, every word punching me harder than the last. She wasn't just betraying me, she was mocking me, counting on my weakness. My neighbor leaned back, his eyes serious. "Now you know. The question is, what are you going to do with it?" For the first time since this started, I realized I didn't have an answer. Not yet, but I knew I couldn't go back to my apartment like nothing had happened. When I stepped back into the hallway, the cool morning air did little to calm the storm inside me. The key to my apartment felt heavier than usual in my pocket, as if it knew what I was about to walk into. I paused outside my own door, listening. Faint movement from the guest room, then silence, then the sound of water running in the bathroom. My mind painted the scene for me. Maribel getting ready. Aaron probably sprawled in bed, comfortable, maybe even smirking if he heard me come in. My neighbor's words and those audio clips looped in my head, each one reminding me exactly what they thought of me. Weak, harmless, pathetic. I slid the key into the lock and opened the door slowly, letting it click shut behind me. I didn't call out. I didn't slam anything to announce I was home. Instead, I walked straight toward the guest room. The door was ajar, sunlight spilling across the floor in sharp rectangles. Aaron was sitting on the edge of the bed, pulling on his shirt, and froze when he saw me. His face went pale for half a second before he forced a grin. "Nathan, hey man." Don't. I cut in, my voice shaking more from adrenaline than fear. Maribel stepped out of the bathroom then, her hair damp, wearing one of my shirts like it was hers. She stopped dead when she saw me, her eyes darting to Aaron, then back to me. "You're home?" she said, like it was an accusation. I didn't answer. I held up my phone, the screen lit with the blurry photo I'd taken last night. "I've been home," I said quietly, "and I know everything." Her face twitched, just for a moment, before she crossed her arms like she was bracing for a fight. "So what? You're finally going to grow a backbone? You think I haven't been honest because I'm scared of you?" She laughed, but it was sharp, brittle. Aaron muttered something about leaving, but I stepped into the doorway, blocking him. "You're not going anywhere," I said, surprising even myself with how steady it came out. My hands were shaking, but my voice wasn't. I told them about the videos, the recordings, the months of evidence my neighbor had collected. I told them about hearing my own wife tell someone I was too weak to do anything about it. For the first time, they both went quiet. Aaron looked like he wanted to disappear. Maribel's jaw tightened, but her eyes flickered in a way that told me she was calculating, not remorseful. "So," she finally said, her voice low, "what's your plan, Nathan? You going to cry? Throw us out? You think anyone's going to feel sorry for you?" I didn't answer her. Instead, I stepped back, pulled my phone from my pocket, and hit send on a text I'd drafted hours earlier. Somewhere down the hall, my neighbor would be receiving it right about now, and that meant the next phase was already in motion. Neither of them knew it yet, but this wasn't going to end with me begging her to stay. I stood there in the doorway, watching both of them shift uncomfortably, the confidence in their faces slipping with every second of silence. Maribel's smirk was gone now, replaced by something I hadn't seen in years, uncertainty. Aaron wouldn't meet my eyes. I knew this was the moment she expected me to explode, to shout, to cry, to give her the satisfaction of proving me weak. Instead, I smiled. "You're right," I said calmly. "I'm not going to throw you out." I stepped aside and nodded toward the door. "You can leave whenever you want, but you're not taking this place with you." Before they could respond, there was a knock at the door. My neighbor, camera in hand, stepped inside. He didn't say a word, just started taking pictures. Aaron swore under his breath, grabbing his shoes, while Maribel tried to block the shots. "Oh, don't bother," my neighbor said, almost cheerfully. "These aren't for the internet. They're for the landlord and the board. Nathan's already signed the complaint. Neither of you will be setting foot in this building again." It was like watching a balloon deflate. Whatever power they thought they had over me dissolved in an instant. Aaron muttered something about finding a hotel. Maribel turned to me, her voice suddenly soft, almost pleading. "Nathan, you don't have to do this. We can talk." But I just shook my head. "We've done nothing but talk, Maribel. You just never listened." They left together, their footsteps echoing down the hallway until the door shut behind them. I exhaled slowly, the tension in my chest finally loosening. For the first time in months, maybe years, the apartment felt like mine again. I spent the rest of the day clearing out the guest room, scrubbing away every trace of what they'd done there. It was exhausting, but each trip to the trash felt like I was reclaiming a piece of myself. By the time evening rolled around, the place was quiet, warm, and, most importantly, mine. I ordered dinner from my favorite takeout spot, sank into the couch, and for once, I didn't feel the weight of someone else's choices dragging me down. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was starting over. Hi, you've been watching Reddit Confessions. If you've ever had a moment where someone underestimated you and you proved them wrong, share it in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories. And remember, sometimes the best revenge isn't shouting or fighting. It's simply walking away and building something better.